Memphis Grizzlies basketball is officially sort of back, and the Grizzlies got their first win of the season in overtime. Unfortunately, that was not first preseason game going to overtime, but first preseason game going to the hands of the victors, the Memphis Grizzlies. We're going to talk about how they got it done, some real major positives up and down the roster, things to be excited about as the season starts. Let's lock in.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
These are indeed exciting times here on Locked On Grizzlies. I am back with you for one reason, Joe Mullinax of Bluff City Media, also a contributor over at SB Nation. Ready, revving, and willing and able to be hosting this Monday edition of Locked On Grizzlies. Flying solo on this Monday, my dear partner, DeMichael Cole. Of course, they're in Memphis covering the game for the Commercial Appeal. They're in Memphis, Tennessee. He's down at FedEx Forum, unable to join me for this edition of the show. We're trying something different, right? Pretty recent after the game just got done. Putting this out there, seeing how we do in terms of engagement and all those sorts of things. If things pick up or perk up in the immediate aftermath of a game within an hour or so when compared to an early morning post. So kind of checking out and seeing how this works. Preseason is a time for experimenting, right? That's exactly what we're doing here on Locked On Grizzlies. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Free and available, we are here at Locked On Grizzlies. Wherever you get your podcast, you can also check us out on YouTube. Like, comment, rate, review, subscribe, all of those wonderful, fun things. It is a wonderful, fun time here on Locked On Grizzlies because we have actual Grizzlies basketball to once again be discussing as part of the Locked On Podcast Network. And it was a good game, right? Too good of a game. You don't want to see overtime in the preseason. But the Grizzlies, except for, a couple of pieces here and there, and we'll talk a little about it towards the end of the show, a lot of things to be excited about, a lot of things to like from this first preseason game for the Grizzlies. You had to know that the starters weren't going to log a ton of minutes. Jaren Jackson Jr. played the most at 25 minutes. It's probably going to be par for the course until maybe the second to last preseason game. They'll probably treat that one more like a dress rehearsal for the season. But this first one, they weren't going to play a ton. And he didn't play a ton at all. But where I want to start beyond Jaren Jackson Jr., we'll talk more about him, is just seeing Steven Adams back out on the floor, right? That's so important. DeMichael and I, DeMichael earlier on at the end of last week talked a lot about how Steve-O, they're working up to 5-on-5, scrimmaging. They were hopeful that he would play. They weren't positive. They weren't going to lock into that. It sounded a lot like Steven Adams wasn't going to play in this game and he wasn't going to be fully healthy to start training camp. That's not the issue, right? The fact that Adams only played 12 minutes is irrelevant. That doesn't matter. He's one of the veteran players on this team. Marcus Smart, if it was a regular season game, probably would have played. The guys that have been around, that have played a lot of basketball in the NBA, they don't need to play on October 8th. I'm more interested in them playing, 25 or so minutes on October 25th when the season opens. So the fact that Smart didn't play doesn't bother me. I'm more focused on Steven Adams and the concerns that were had over the knee by me, by others. Is he healthy? Is he going to be able to be out there? He was out there, and he did a lot of the things that you would hope to see him do. It was a small sample size, 12 minutes. I'm sure we'll see that creep up slowly but surely over the next couple of weeks. But just for him to be healthy enough to participate and actually play a full quarter's worth of minutes, it is gigantic for this Grizzlies team for all the reasons we've discussed before, right? If this is your first time here on Locked On Grizzlies, Steven Adams is so undervalued, especially offensively, because of his ability to rebound. He only grabbed one offensive rebound in this game, but that obviously can fluctuate very quickly when Adams is on the floor. He's such a good screener, does a great job taking up space and creating space on either end of the floor. He's important for the Grizzlies, and it allows for Jaren Jackson Jr. to be his best version of himself as a 4, which Steve Kerr and FIBA learned the hard way, trying to start Jaren as the true 5. I loved the experimentation, but at the same time, if you're a Grizzlies fan, if you've watched the Memphis Grizzlies play, you know that Jaren is best suited to be the 4, and that kind of showed through in this game. Again, we'll talk more about Jaren later. I really liked the idea of the Kennard-Bane starting group together. It didn't hit the way you would expect in the first game. They were a combined 6 of 18 from the floor, Kennard and Bane, and 44 minutes total combined playing time. Only 2 for 10 from 3. That's not super concerning. Again, the shots will fall. There are usually not going to be massive swings in terms of what they are at this stage. They're both 40% three-point shooters. I don't think we have to worry about Kennard and Bane combining for 20% from beyond the arc consistently. You're looking for the way that the offense flows around them, especially among that starting unit. You're looking for how those two guys are able to defend. That's extremely important, right? Because so much of the knock, if it is Kennard who starts alongside Bane on the perimeter with assuming Marcus Smart when he does go for the Grizzlies, if it is Kennard, which maybe it will, maybe it won't, if it is him, that creates all sorts of offensive opportunity, but it also creates a lot of defensive possibilities for the opposing team. So you want to have more offensive production, but you also want to see them create offense for other guys to help offset that a little bit. 7 assists across Bane and Kennard, which I thought was really important and impressive. You know, I've been clamoring ever since Luke Kennard arrived in Memphis. Let him have the ball in his hand more. Let him create for others off the dribble. Let him get into pick and roll sets and find open shooters, taking advantage of the gravity. I hate using that phrase, but the capacity that he has to shoot the ball at such an elite level. Opponents have to stay on him and they have to respect him. And Kennard is able to make good decisions with the basketball. So giving him that chance, especially in the regular season, to kind of find his footing in that again, so that when the postseason does roll around in April and May, and you're playing the Los Angeles Lakers or somebody like that who has length and athleticism on the perimeter, maybe that physicality that those types of teams can bring won't shock his system so much because he got more reps at it throughout the entire course of the regular season and the preseason right now, obviously. So I liked the assists from those guys. I really liked how they both were able to find ways to impact the game in a positive manner, even when their games respectively weren't clicking the way that you would hope, right? So I thought that was a really big thing for both of them to have success creating offense for others. And then obviously the second segment later on, we're going to focus on the other two starters, Derrick Rose and Jaren Jackson Jr. I would be remiss if I didn't talk about some guys that figure to be in that rotation. Because again, it's an early season look. If Marcus Smart were out, what could Taylor Jenkins potentially do? Derrick Rose gets the start. We'll talk more about here in a little bit. But John Conchar was an early sub in. You had Zaire Williams get a lot of run. Xavier Tillman, Santi Aldama, David Roddy, Jake LaRavia was somebody who was initially the 11th man, so to speak, the next guy out, or 13th man, when Ja and Smart are both out there. So Ja Morant and Marcus Smart. So you look at those guys. Santi Aldama did a lot of the same stuff that he did in Spain. 8 rebounds, led the team on this night in terms of cleaning the glass in just 18 minutes played. If he's able to do that as a reserve of playing alongside Adams and Jaren, excuse me, you know, that matters a lot. You know, Xavier Tillman, can he maintain his defensive positioning? The trust that Taylor Jenkins, the head coach of the Memphis Grizzlies, clearly has in Tillman because of his versatility, his ability to stay in front of guys. Can he find ways, as we've talked about before here on Locked On Grizzlies, to expand his offensive game? Because we'll talk more about him later on in the show. Kenneth Lofton Jr. is coming, and there's going to be greater clamorings for him to be that 4th or 5th big. Xavier Tillman does a lot on the defensive end. He's essentially a poor man Steven Adams. That's one of the reasons that he is still there. Obviously doesn't have the frame, but a good rebounder, good screen setter. We've talked about his defensive prowess. If Kenneth Lofton Jr. can meet that gap a little bit, we're going to talk more about Lofton Jr. later, but he's coming, right? He was impressive. I think I've seen enough of John Conchar, and I'm sure I'll talk to DeMichael Cole a little bit about that on tomorrow's show. DeMichael will be back with me for our Tuesday edition of the podcast. I've seen enough. I don't need any more of Conchar. I understand he's reliable. He's malleable. The advanced numbers love him. My eyes tell me there are other guys that could get those opportunities, starting with Roddy and LaRavia. I'm good. I'm good with John Conchar. It's just one game, and that will tie into what we're about to talk about here on Locked On Grizzlies. It is truly just one game, but there was a lot of things to be optimistic and excited about. John Conchar was not one of them. I was not moved in any way, shape, or form by the way that he played in this contest, at least enough to rationalize why he would be in there instead of someone like Zaire Williams when the games start to count, why he would be in there instead of a insert Luke Kennard, right? If Luke Kennard's coming off the bench once everybody's healthy. Conchar just doesn't fit that mold. He's just not in that mix for me, at least. Maybe DeMichael will disagree with me. We'll talk more about that on our Tuesday show. But coming up next here on Locked On Grizzlies, we're going to be focusing in on the two guys that, in my opinion, really shine the brightest in the game on Sunday night against the Pacers. Again, lots of things to like, some things not to like as much. A high-scoring first and third quarter for the Pacers. I'm sure Taylor Jenkins is going to get on his guys in film about defensive openings that were too prevalent for Indiana at times, especially since guys like Tyrese Halliburton didn't play. But there were two dudes on that starting five who really shine brightly, and I'm going to focus on them next here on Locked On Grizzlies. But first, this episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by Gametime. Gametime is fantastic because if you're in a position where you are running late for a show, a concert, sporting event, whatever the case might be, and you're trying to find the best tickets you possibly can in a crunch, Gametime is the fastest and easiest way to buy those tickets for any type of event near you with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, as well as better understandings of views from your seat. They have the lowest price guarantee, and it's easy to find and buy tickets for any kind of event in your area. With zone deals, you pick the section and Gametime picks the seats for an average of 18% savings. They are obsessed with finding ways to help you save money on tickets. And with the Gametime guarantee, that means you will always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section for in row for less, Gametime will credit your account 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, a shout out to Derrick Rose and Jaren Jackson Jr. Well deserved. Stick with us. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am Joe Mullinax, your host with the most for this edition of the podcast, this late Sunday, early Monday edition of the show. Obviously, all day Monday, different timing in terms of pushing it live. Hopefully, you're checking it out with us and riding with us, regardless of when you're able to watch and listen. That's the beautiful thing about the Locked On Podcast Network. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube, whenever you're free, right? Whenever you're most able to allow the melodic baritone of my voice or the wonderful suaveness, if that's a word, suaveness, debonair, DeMichael Cole of the Commercial Appeal, when it's both of us, like it will be for tomorrow's show, however the case might be, giving something a different shot this week. And we're excited to be back with you each and every day on Locked On Grizzlies. A lot of things to like about the Grizzlies-Pacers game on Sunday night. I liked Jaren Jackson Jr. the most. And I liked seeing him in positions where he was comfortable. I liked watching him pick up where he left off last season in terms of his stocks. 7 stocks in 25 minutes of play, 5 blocks, 2 steals. His timing is impeccable. He reads the opposing offenses extremely well, positions himself, gets the flow of the opposing team's offensive scheme. And that helps him tremendously because obviously he has phenomenal athletic gifts. But it's not just the fact that he's long and that he has the capacity to leap and he has this innate ability to time it that seems like it's just within him, right? It's like he was born to be a great defensive player. You watch him as he develops and he's becoming more cerebral. He positions his body ahead of time. He knows what's coming and he plans out a level of escape into a position on weak side help to make a block. or he finagles his way around to make sure that he can contest a shot, even though that's not his primary objective or that's not his primary assignment. He is in a different world right now in terms of how he's able to impact the way that other teams score the ball. And that matters so much for this Grizzlies team, especially these first 25 games with John Morant out, because I'm on record as saying I think that they're going to struggle. That was the strength of Tyus Jones. I talked about him being the best substitute teacher in the NBA. Tyus Jones is a starter? Heck yeah. Dude can play. I think he's going to do well for the Washington Wizards. Tyus Jones is a true reserve to John Morant, was not very good. And now you are going into a situation where you have Marcus Smart. That's not his strength as a primary point guard. I'm excited to watch him next to Desmond Bane as a starter with Ja on the floor starting in late December. But we're not there, right? It's going to be Marcus at the primary point guard position to begin the season. That's not his forte. That's not where he's really going to most positively impact the Grizzlies in that offensive role in particular. So they're going to have to hang their hat on defense to keep games close. And as they do, Jaren Jackson Jr. is the catalyst for that. It's great to have Marcus Smart. I do think he's going to replace Dillon Brooks better than most people expect. Yes, Marcus Smart is undersized, but he's been undersized his entire NBA career. He was undersized a couple of years ago when he won Defensive Player of the Year. It doesn't matter a ton as long as you're able to play with the intensity, the vigor, again, similar to Jaren in terms of the cerebral component of how you play defense, coupling that effort that great defense requires with an understanding of the opponent's goals offensively and what they're trying to do and the sets that they cultivate within that philosophy offensively. Marcus Smart gets it, so does Jaren Jackson Jr., and it was fun to watch Jaren do that again for the Grizzlies. Something that DeMichael Cole, when he comes on our next episode, he can talk more about this, what it meant to him to be in the arena, to hear Derrick Rose's name be announced in FedEx Forum as a member of the Memphis Grizzlies. There's a lot, I don't want to say baggage, there's a lot of emotion. And I get that. I lived in Memphis for several years. Obviously, I've covered the team for a long time. That part of that is covering sports in the city on a more broad spectrum. I get the I get the Derrick Rose stuff. I didn't live it, right? Like I was in college in Virginia when Derrick Rose was at Memphis as a student, as a player, before he went to the NBA. And I know that team holds a special place in the heart of Memphians. Derrick Rose obviously was a massive piece of all of that era of Memphis Tigers basketball. So when Rose has the performance that he did, and again, it was preseason, right? 6 of 8 shooting, 13 points in just 14 minutes played, couple of assists, showing the capacity to still get off the dribble, create space for himself as a primary ball handler. He looked like he still had it at times in this game. Now, the Pacers figured to not be the best team in the NBA. Again, they were without Tyrese Halliburton, their best player in this one. But just the fact that he physically can do it, right? Because for me, when the signing occurred, I talked about how I thought he was washed, and I'm still not convinced he isn't washed after one preseason basketball game. But it's important to acknowledge that going into it, I didn't think he could do some of the stuff he did in this game. Maybe I was too low on him. That's certainly fair and possible. But to see him still have that wiggle, as several people on X or Twitter, whatever you want to call it, pointed out, he still can create that movement within himself to get that space off of a screen, or even when it's a one-on-one isolation situation. He talked about it in the post-game interview with Rob Fisher of the Grizzlies telecast, how he needs to protect the basketball, which was good to hear because obviously once the season starts, Marcus Smart will be replacing John Morant as best he can, and Derrick Rose essentially will be replacing Tyus Jones as best he can. Derrick Rose will be replacing Tyus Jones. So the ability to protect possessions matters for this team. Again, is probably going to have some offensive struggles. It's good to hear him say that, finding ways to get guys the ball where they want it, when they want it, understanding when they don't want the ball and not forcing things. That's all part of this process for him. And that will come in practice as well as in games. But it's really cool to see Memphians, like my friend DeMichael, my co-host here on Locked On Grizzlies, be so passionate about this guy after all these years coming back to Memphis, being a complementary, constructive player. Even if he's not good at basketball anymore, the way that he has handled himself in media availabilities and interviews, he's shown so much growth, and he's exactly what this team needs. I agree with that completely. If you can add on top of that the ability to still play basketball, if he can do that for at the very least, the stretch of time that Ja Morant is out, it's a home run signing for the Memphis Grizzlies, and it's another big win for Zach Kleiman and company to bring in a guy who has connections to the city, can be a role model in terms of the way that he played more so than anything else to your young superstar, and still have the capacity to create and break things for your offense in a positive manner. We saw that from Rose, and hopefully we continue to. He's not going to be on 6 of 8 shooting every night. That's unrealistic. You want to see that rhythm, right? You want to see him staying in the game's rhythm and not forcing things, playing within himself, and being a productive piece of the Grizzlies puzzle. That's most certainly what he was on Sunday night. And Jaren, of course, is expected to be that on a nightly basis. That's part of what the role of Jaren Jackson Jr. is at this stage of the Grizzlies franchise and organization. Derrick Rose being a contributor is not as significant in terms of expectations. But if he can be that guy, it's significant because it helps Memphis stay afloat while their superstar Ja Morant is out. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, we'll close out this episode of the show, taking a look at valuable end game situations for players like Jake LaRavia, Kenneth Lofton Jr., and others. But first, this episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by Jase Medical and the Jase Case. The Jase Case provides 5 life-saving antibiotics for emergency use. All it takes to get a Jase Case is filling out a simple online form, and in some cases, jumping on a quick call with one of our board-certified physicians. Don't get caught unprepared. Jase will handle everything for you, from online evaluation to licensed pharmacy medication. All sorts of delivery and consultation and care questions can be answered. Everyone should feel empowered to care for themselves and their loved ones during the unexpected. And with storms, shortages, pandemics, reliance on China, supplies chain issues, we need to be prepared now more than ever. Get $20 off these life-saving antibiotics today from Jase Medical by using my code Locked On at checkout on jasemedical.com. That's JASE medical.com. Get yours today. Use that promo code and get set with Jase Medical, thanks in part to Locked On Grizzlies. We'll talk the young Grizzlies and closing out an overtime preseason game next here on Locked On Grizzlies. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am your host for this episode, Joe Mullinax, once again, flying solo to Michael Cole, closing up things down at FedEx Forum in Memphis, Tennessee. Recording this show in the immediate aftermath of the Grizzlies' preseason victory over the Indiana Pacers in overtime, pushing it live right thereafter. So we'll see how everything works out in terms of engagement, trying stuff out here in the preseason. So obviously, whenever you're listening to this, it doesn't necessarily matter, but it's still fresh in the minds of those watching this right away, fresh in my mind, obviously, recording it immediately after the game was over. And kudos to Pete Pranica and Brevin Knight, the Grizzlies television, announcers, commentators. They were in midseason form in terms of the way they were covering the game, but kudos to FedEx Forum fans. However many fans were actually there in the arena, it sounded like and felt like through television a regular season game. Folks were cheering. The excitement whenever Kenneth Lofton Jr. got the basketball was off the charts. The big dunk by Jake LaRavia at the end, people thrilled about, lots of energy. I would say a lot of the reason this feels like a large success, despite the Grizzlies struggling in terms of defensive rebounds, despite the Grizzlies being pushed to the limit against a team that figures to be at the bottom of the Eastern Conference in the Indiana Pacers without their best player. There's lots of things that you could dive into a little bit deeper if you wanted to feel a little bit more hesitant about how Sunday night went. I'm not going to, because of all of the good things that I've been alluding to, and because it's preseason. I'm not as concerned about the opponent as I am the Memphis Grizzlies watching these preseason games and how they execute. The defense needs to improve. They got to rebound better, and they will. But there's just so many more positives. And one of those positives was how the young guys competed at the end. Don't get me wrong. As someone that lives on the East Coast, as someone who, during the NBA season, there's late nights recording shows and writing articles for Bluff City Media. I don't want a ton of overtime preseason games. I don't want overtime regular season games, right? Much less a preseason one. But Brevin and Pete on the announced broadcast said it exactly right. As a coach, Taylor Jenkins was thrilled because it gave end of game experience to guys that are not going to get it consistently at the NBA level. Jake LaRavia, even if he is actively with the Grizzlies more than he is with the hustle this year, he's not going to be on the floor in late game situations unless something's gone horribly wrong, somebody got hurt, foul trouble, whatever the case might be. Kenneth Lofton Jr., even if he works his way up to being a rotation player for the Grizzlies, if he beats out Xavier Tillman somehow, right? And he's the fourth or fifth big. Again, he's not going to be on the floor unless there were injuries, unless there was foul trouble, something along those lines. Gigi Jackson is going to spend a vast majority of his season down in South Haven with the Memphis Hustle G League team. He's not going to be with the Grizzlies that often. Same thing with Jacob Gilyard. Those were four names that all had opportunities within that overtime period, within that closing moments or those closing moments of the fourth quarter to go out there and compete at the NBA level, again, admittedly preseason, and see how they executed, how they handled these situations. And it matters so much, not just for the Grizzlies and the Pacers, but also to scouts who watch this film. If the Grizzlies waive someone like a Shaq Harrison and he's not able to be on the active roster, but another team wants to bring him in and see how he does, that's pretty significant, right? It's a chance for him to show that he can still play, that he can go out there and be engaged and be a competitor. And that matters, right? You're not going to see a ton of Gigi Jackson with the Grizzlies this year on that two-way contract. His shooting, I don't care. 1 for 8 doesn't matter. I want to see him rebound. I want to see him move laterally. Is he a 4? Is he a 3? Can he be a true combo forward? You find that out a lot more when it's the closing moments of a game and opposing teams, even in the preseason. To be a professional athlete means you're a competitor. At some point, you had to compete, right? Multiple points, more than likely. And they want to win. They may not risk health and life and limb to go dive for a ball in a preseason game. But when it's one-on-one, when they're executing a set, they're not sitting there saying, it doesn't matter if it goes in or not. They're trying to win. And that energy is so significant because that's not something they're going to get consistently at the G League level, watching from the bench in terms of the end of a game. So Jake LaRavia having the performance he did and getting hot at the right time, in the overtime period, it was him and Kenneth Lofton Jr. who drove the bus, so to speak, for the Grizzlies in the victory. That matters. That is growth for two young players. Because while the Grizzlies are prioritizing competing, as well they should, while they should be in the top 10 in the NBA this year in terms of overall record, top 5 in the Western Conference, while they are a squad who should potentially compete for the Western Conference Finals, they still have a lot of young pieces that they're trying to develop and bring along. LaRavia and Lofton Jr., great examples of that. To have those moments where you're the guy with the ball in your hands. You're the guy that has to make the stop, that understands the defensive shift, that has to move their feet to keep the dribble penetration in front of you, to have the ball on the block in the ISO. It sounded like Zach Randolph at times with Kenneth Lofton Jr. got the ball on the low post. Memphis loves the guy. And I've said it a couple of times now. Xavier Tillman better watch out because if Kenneth Lofton Jr. can show the capacity to defend at a better level, not even the same as Kenneth Lofton Jr., but if Xavier Tillman has the capacity to defend but not score, and Kenneth Lofton Jr. can score in a variety of ways and shows he's a little bit better defender, maybe X starts seeing more of the pine compared to Lofton Jr. But you don't know that until you see them physically go out there and do it. And Kenneth Lofton Jr., to his credit, almost every single time that he has gotten opportunity, he's taken advantage. Jake LaRavia, for the first time or one of the first times tonight, when he got that opportunity, he took advantage. And he did it, and they did it in opportune moments for the organization, for the team. It was winning time. They made plays to win, and they're not always going to get that shot at this level of basketball to do those sorts of things. So while Taylor Jenkins was coaching them and the entire NBA staff, not the Memphis Hustle, not the G League group, while those guys were working with them, they showed the capacity to make plays. That is a step forward in terms of development, that even though the Grizzlies are trying to win and win now, they're not forsaking that for the future. Tonight was a good reminder of that. And that Sunday night game, really exciting, really cool to see those guys help close it out. So you saw the dudes that you're counting on right now performing well, and you also saw people that down the road you hope to contribute to this Grizzlies franchise doing some good things too. All around a successful first preseason game. The next time we're here on Locked On Grizzlies, we'll be talking about the next preseason game, the lay of the Eastern Conference. Now that the Milwaukee Bucks have Damian Lillard, might be a good time for DeMichael and I to revisit some preseason power rankings. Where will we put Memphis in terms of title contention? We'll preview that Milwaukee Bucks game. I'm sure we'll talk to DeMichael a little bit about his takes from being there in FedEx Forum for the first preseason game against the Pacers as well. That's all coming up on our next edition of Locked On Grizzlies. But thank you for joining me for this edition of Locked On Grizzlies, free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure you're checking us out on YouTube as well. Like, comment, rate, review, subscribe, all those fun things. Until next time, I am Joe Mullinax. Stay locked in. We will catch you early Tuesday morning for our next episode going live of Locked On Grizzlies. Check us out anytime at YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Have a great one.